The day Everett Calloway bought the ugliest car on the entire dealership lot, 3 salesmen laughed so loudly that even the customers inside the showroom turned to look. The rusty blue station wagon had a cracked windshield, a dented hood, bald tires, a missing side mirror, and an engine that had not started in nearly 4 years. Its paint was peeling in wide patches, and weeds had grown around the wheels where it had sat forgotten behind the dealership. Yet Everett stood beside it with his worn work jacket, counted his money twice, and quietly handed over the keys while people whispered that a struggling single father had finally lost his mind. What none of them knew was that 21 days later, that same broken car would become the reason an entire room fell silent. Before we continue, if you believe in kindness, forgiveness, hope, and second chances, please like this video, share it with someone who needs a little hope today, leave a comment, and subscribe to our channel so you can be part of our family and our community. Everett was 38 years old and had spent most of his life learning how to survive without asking anyone for help. He had once worked as a mechanical engineer for a respected automotive company, but 3 years earlier, his wife, Marissa, had died unexpectedly after a long illness, leaving him to raise their 9-year-old daughter, Wren, alone. Everett had tried to return to his old career, but hospital bills, childcare expenses, and the emotional exhaustion of becoming both parents had slowly pushed him away from the corporate world. Eventually, he took a job repairing farm equipment at a small workshop outside town. The pay was modest, but the owner allowed him flexible hours so Everett could take Wren to school, attend parent meetings, and be there when she needed him. He never complained about the sacrifices. To him, raising his daughter was not a burden. It was the most important responsibility of his life. Wren was the kind of child who noticed things adults ignored. She noticed when her father smiled even though he was exhausted. She noticed when he quietly skipped lunch so she could have enough money for a school field trip. She noticed how he kept her mother's old photograph inside his wallet, even though the edges had become soft and worn. One afternoon, while Everett was fixing a broken tractor transmission, Wren sat nearby drawing cars in a battered notebook. She had inherited her mother's love for old things and her father's fascination with machines. She had always believed that broken things could be repaired if someone cared enough to understand what was wrong with them. The problem was that Everett's own car had finally become impossible to depend on. It was nearly 20 years old, consumed oil faster than fuel, and had begun stalling at intersections. Everett knew he needed another vehicle, but every reliable used car he found was far beyond his budget. He had saved for months, putting away a little from every paycheck. Then one Saturday morning, while delivering a repaired mower to a local dealership, he saw the forgotten station wagon sitting behind the building. Most people would have walked past it without a second glance. Everett stopped immediately. The car was a 1972 Hartwell Grand Touring wagon, a rare model that had once been admired for its unusually strong frame and innovative suspension system. The dealership had acquired it years earlier as part of an estate sale, but nobody wanted to invest money in restoring it. Everett opened the hood and immediately saw something that made his heart beat faster. Beneath the grime and corrosion were several components that were remarkably original. The engine block had barely been touched. The chassis was structurally sound. Whoever owned the car had simply stopped maintaining it. The salesman, Grant Mercer, came outside and watched Everett inspect the vehicle. Grant was young, confident, and dressed in a spotless suit that seemed completely out of place beside the rusted wagon. When Everett asked about the price, Grant almost laughed. The dealership had already considered the car worthless, so he named a low figure just to get it off the property. Everett asked if he could inspect the engine more closely. Grant shrugged and told him he was welcome to waste his time. 2 other salesmen joined them, amused by the spectacle. One joked that Everett should probably bring a shovel because the car might be buried before it ever ran again. Another laughed that buying it would be like adopting a dead horse. Everett heard every word, but he did not argue. He simply opened the hood, examined the engine, and made a decision. He counted his savings and purchased the car. When he drove it home behind a tow truck, several neighbors watched from their porches. Nobody understood why he had spent almost every dollar he had saved on something that looked ready for the scrapyard. Everett didn't explain. He only parked the wagon beside his small garage and spent the next several days studying it. Wren watched him work whenever she came home from school. Everett removed rusted bolts, cleaned electrical connections, tested old components, and carefully documented everything. He refused to replace anything unless he knew it was necessary. He was not simply restoring a car. He was solving a puzzle. And slowly, something remarkable began happening. The more he studied the vehicle, the more he realized that it had been built with engineering ideas far ahead of its time. The suspension geometry was unusually advanced. The engine had an uncommon design that allowed it to produce impressive torque despite its modest size. Most importantly, Everett discovered evidence that the car had been modified decades earlier by someone who understood experimental fuel efficiency technology. Hidden beneath the rear floor was a forgotten compartment containing handwritten engineering notes, faded diagrams, and a series of calculations describing a prototype energy recovery system. Everett stared at the papers for a long time. He recognized the handwriting. The notes had been written by a retired engineer named Conrad Vail, one of the men who had helped develop early efficiency systems for a major automotive manufacturer. Everett had studied Conrad's work during his own university years. The documents suggested that the station wagon had once been used as a private experimental test vehicle. Suddenly, the rusty car was no longer worthless. It was a piece of forgotten engineering history. But Everett did not tell anyone. For the next 14 days, he worked whenever he could. Before school, after work, during lunch breaks, and on weekends, he repaired the vehicle piece by piece. Wren helped clean small components and organize the tools. Sometimes they worked silently. Sometimes she drew pictures of the car as it changed. Every day, Everett became more convinced that he could bring it back to life. Meanwhile, word spread through town that the single father had bought a junk car. Grant Mercer began telling customers about him, exaggerating the story and calling Everett the man who had paid good money for scrap metal. Some people laughed. Others felt sorry for him. Everett heard the comments but never responded. Then, on the 20th day, something happened that changed everything. Everett discovered that the experimental system in the car could be rebuilt using modern components without changing its original design. He spent the entire afternoon assembling the system carefully. When he finally connected the last wire, he stood back and looked at the battered wagon. Wren stood beside him. The engine started. It didn't roar. It hummed. Everett's eyes filled with tears. For the first time in years, he felt something other than survival. He felt possibility. The next morning, Everett drove the restored station wagon back to the dealership. The reaction was immediate. People stared. Grant walked outside expecting to see the same broken vehicle. Instead, he saw a beautifully restored classic wagon with polished metal, carefully repaired bodywork, new tires, a restored interior, and an engine running so smoothly that it sounded almost impossible for a vehicle that had spent years abandoned. Grant's smile disappeared. Everett didn't come to brag. He came because the dealership's owner, Eleanor Whitmore, had heard about the restoration and asked to see the vehicle herself. Eleanor was 61, respected throughout the automotive industry, and known for being direct but fair. She inspected the car for nearly an hour. Everett showed her the original documents and explained what he had discovered. Eleanor became visibly emotional when she recognized the name of Conrad Vail. Conrad had been her father. For decades, Eleanor had believed that the experimental car her father had once built had been destroyed after his death. She had searched for it without success. The vehicle sitting in front of her was the missing prototype. But Everett had discovered something even more important. The experimental system Conrad had designed contained an idea that could be adapted into modern automotive technology. Everett had spent years working with efficiency systems, and he immediately understood its potential. The dealership's executives gathered around the vehicle. Engineers examined Everett's work. Experts were contacted. The laughter from 21 days earlier had disappeared completely. Grant stood silently in the corner. Eleanor eventually asked Everett why he had not tried to sell the Discovery immediately. Everett looked at Ren. He explained that he had not bought the car because he thought it would make him rich. He bought it because he knew what it felt like for people to look at something struggling and decide it had no value. He knew what it felt like to be judged by appearances. And he believed the car deserved one person willing to look beneath the rust. Those words changed the room. Eleanor offered Everett a partnership to develop the technology. But Everett made one condition. He wanted the original restoration preserved, and he wanted a portion of the future project dedicated to scholarships for young mechanics and engineers who could not afford university. Eleanor agreed. Then she turned toward Grant. Grant looked ashamed. For the first time, he understood what his jokes had revealed about him. He had looked at Everett's worn clothes, old truck, and limited budget and assumed he knew the man's worth. He had never bothered to look deeper. Grant apologized. Everett could have humiliated him. Instead, he forgave him. He told Grant that everyone makes mistakes, but what matters is whether they learn from them. That afternoon, the restored Hartwell wagon was displayed inside the dealership showroom. The same people who had laughed at Everett now gathered around it in silence. Photographers arrived. Engineers examined the restored system. Eleanor stood beside the vehicle with tears in her eyes, realizing that the forgotten machine had returned to her family because a struggling father refused to believe that broken meant useless. But the most meaningful moment came when Ren climbed into the driver's seat. She placed her hands on the steering wheel and smiled. Everett stood beside her. For 21 days, the world had seen a rusty broken car. Ren had seen something different. She had seen her father refusing to give up. She had watched him turn embarrassment into determination, poverty into creativity, and an abandoned machine into an opportunity that could change thousands of lives. Weeks later, the partnership became one of the most promising efficiency projects in the region. Everett was offered a senior engineering position, but he chose to work fewer hours than before so he could continue being present for Ren. He never forgot why he had started rebuilding that car in the first place. And Grant changed too. He began volunteering at a community technical school, teaching young people basic automotive skills. He eventually became one of the strongest supporters of the scholarship program Everett had requested. Their relationship never became perfect, but it became honest, and sometimes forgiveness does not mean forgetting the past. Sometimes it means refusing to let the past decide what people become next. Months later, the restored Hartwell was placed in a small automotive museum with a plaque beside it. The plaque did not celebrate its value in money. It celebrated the person who had believed it was worth saving. Everett brought Ren to see it. She stood quietly beside the car and looked at the words beneath its name. Then she reached for her father's hand. Everett realized that the greatest thing he had restored had never been the car. It had been hope. He had taught his daughter that people, dreams, relationships, and even broken opportunities could sometimes be repaired when someone cared enough to try. And perhaps that was why the laughter from 21 days earlier no longer mattered. The people who laughed had seen rust. Everett had seen possibility. Before we end, tell us in the comments what you would have done if everyone laughed at your dream before they knew the truth. Would you have given up, or would you have kept going? Leave a meaningful comment about the lesson this story gave you, because someone reading your words today may be fighting a battle you know nothing about. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. Because sometimes the world laughs at what it cannot understand. Sometimes the thing everyone calls worthless is simply waiting for the right person to recognize its value. And sometimes, the greatest comeback does not happen when you prove everyone wrong. It happens when you quietly become the person you were always meant to be.